Right, okay, we're starting to have people join us, and we're in the downtown den today with the Mayor for the West Midlands. Doesn't really need any introduction, the ubiquitous Andy Street. I'm delighted to see you today, Andy. First time we've had a chance to chat since March, I think, and we've still not been able to get together live, which was the initial intention of this event. But thanks for joining us today. And as I was saying offline there, we want to be upbeat, which you always are, glass half full sort of guy. You'll be as aware as most of the challenges that we're facing within the business community, but equally you're looking at recovery and how Birmingham is going to react once we come out of this thing. So can you tell us a little bit about the West Midlands recovery plan and the sort of things that you think will be able to get Birmingham bouncing back quickly?
Yeah, with pleasure, Frank. So thank you for putting this together, and nice to be able to talk to some people. You never know when you're doing this how many people are there. There's only 4 names showing on my screen, so I assume we're talking to more than ourselves. But yeah, nice to be able to do it. So when you sent around the note, you said the first question would be about post-pandemic Birmingham, and I thought to myself, he's the optimist. What does he know about the vaccine? So, and then lo and behold, 2 days ago, your word was proven right. So anyway, so I think the thing to say about this, Frank, is that I know it's tough at the moment, and my goodness, we're going to hear some tough stories, I'm sure, as the time we've got together go through. But I want us to hold on to the things that were making this place very successful before the pandemic, because actually some of the fundamental points carry on after the pandemic as well. And that's why that you've got to keep the faith almost. So if you think of what was going on before, we did have record employment levels. We did have housing growth doubling over 5 years. We did have the best skilled workforce we'd ever achieved. And of course, we had some of the really big competitions that we'd won around Commonwealth Games, around City of Culture, around 5G. And of course, the biggest one of all, getting HS2 and that multi-billion pound investment over the line just before the pandemic struck. And thank God we did, frankly. They are all still there, and we've not got to lose sight of them. But I suppose I would put one other thought, which may be the sort of catalyst for further conversations. I think the pandemic makes it even more important that we think of new sources of economic growth as well, which are the new sectors that we've got to really get behind. And just to give a specific example, rather than talking generalizations, if you think of all this talk about green growth and growing back better, you can see, if you think of the automotive sector and the electrification industry, the electrification of that, it is mission critical that our sector is electrified, and that will be the source of new jobs. And that's why I'm personally obsessed with landing this battery factory across the West Midlands.
And you've announced there, Andy, a whole series of positive initiatives that, as you say, were signed off pre the pandemic. And all the signs suggest that we're still on course to get those delivered.
Yes, categorically. And actually, I think it's even more important the things that we were working on before are now there. I actually think we're quite fortunate. So let's just take something like the Commonwealth Games. That is £1 billion of public investment into majority of the city, but the region, events in Coventry and Wolverhampton, in Warwickshire and Staffordshire. And that is about creating jobs. And houses. So if we think of the redevelopment in Perry Bar, we know it's not going to be used for athletes to stay in, but we've continued to secure the government money for that. That's 5,000 homes. It's 400 local people being employed in the construction of that place. Now, that wouldn't have come about if we hadn't won the Commonwealth Games. So yes, all of those things that we built up before, even more important that we now deploy them on the back of COVID.
And of course, Andy, you've alluded to the fact that many businesses at the moment are struggling, but you joined us at a forum recently with the hospitality sector, which has been at the front line of many of these challenges, and supported the notion that we needed to look again at furlough and at the financial support available to those businesses. So you must be delighted that the Chancellor's reacted positively to that.
So this was beginning of October when Birmingham, Solihull, Wolverhampton, get this right, Walsall and Sandwell at the time, 5 of our boroughs, went into tier 2. And if I'm very honest, Frank, I thought the government were wrong to put us into tier 2 without further economic support. And the particular issue was the hospitality industry, because obviously under tier 2, they were told that people from different households could not meet in their venues. So if you're running a pub or a restaurant, that's pretty serious to your turnover. So yeah, I did. I spoke out that day, made it to 10 o'clock news. And I was, to answer your question head on, yeah, I was pleased that 10 days later, the Chancellor stood up in the House of Commons and said, we've reconsidered this. And he very kindly gave me a name check as being effective in my lobbying of him. But it was important because the sector was not being appropriately supported for the dealing with the health issue. I've always believed the health stuff and the economic stuff have to go hand in glove, and the government had got that wrong. But they did respond reasonably quickly. And that intervention, by the way, we think that that's worth about £64 million a month for West Midlands hospitality, well, not just hospitality, other industries as well that were in the same place. But of course, that has in a sense all been superseded by us going into national lockdown. But just one detail, because in case businesses on the line don't understand this, even though we've gone into national lockdown, businesses who can prove that they were affected during tier 2 will get the grant for the period that we were in tier 2. So in simple language, for October. So that money is not lost for that period.
Yeah, it's backdated, isn't it?
It's backdated, absolutely, yes.
Right. And just to stick with the hospitality sector, but perhaps broaden it to the wider visitor economy as well. And it's such an important aspect of what makes economies work, and that whole ecosystem that relies on hospitality. You know, people think bars, restaurants, hotels, but of course they then have a huge supply chain as well. So it impacts on the entire business community, this. And then when we look forward to coming out of this thing, and let's be conservative with the small c and suggest that it's going to be the spring. I think things like the Commonwealth Games, the fact that HS2 is coming to Birmingham, the fact that we've still got the Paradise development going ahead. There's so many things to look forward to, and close to your heart, Andy, Aston Villa are definitely still going to be in the Premier League. So,
well, actually, we don't know that, because the very wise chief executive, who's done a very good job, when they'd won 4 out of 4, I said to him, well, you know, you're on target for Europe. And he said, no, we've just got 12 points to avoid being relegated. So that modesty will see, I'm a great believer in that, will see any business through, actually. Yeah, but sorry, I interrupted you, Frank.
No, it's okay. Listen, Villa beat Liverpool 7-2, so I will be eternally grateful. But, you know, the serious point about this is the culture, sport, hospitality, key components of any successful economy, Andy.
Yeah. So, yeah, you're absolutely right about this. And let me draw particular focus to one area of this that we have not got right yet. So we are incredibly successful as a region. And actually, in this case, it is particularly Birmingham, but Birmingham and Solihull, actually, to be precise, in this whole business tourism sector, which might be thought of as conferences, exhibitions and events. And actually a higher proportion of our GDP comes from that than any other part of the country. So this really matters to us. And obviously the NEC is our sort of poster child for this, which is a big business in its own right, the biggest conference business in the UK. So we're very, very good at this, and this has not had sufficient support from the government. I'm very clear, and we're actually, I haven't made the letter public, but we're in discussions with the Treasury over specific support there, because clearly that business cannot open, not just through the lockdown period, but it looks like and through the winter and early part of next year. So we definitely need support for that sector, because it really, really matters to us. And you're absolutely right, Frank. It has a sort of multiplier effect. All the individual small suppliers, whether they be the freelance guys who do the lighting for an event, or whether it be the catering suppliers, right then down to their suppliers. So it is a very, very important sector for us. They've had the general support, and of course we're able also, lots of them, to get the tier 2 support. But this point about the big venues not being able to open, we are definitely onto the government on that question.
And you talked about a couple of issues now, Andy, where You've directly challenged the government, lobbied them on behalf of the business community. And I think, you know, if you look at some of the things that have happened in the north, for example, at the moment, there's mass testing taking place in Liverpool as a result of the local authority there engaging with the government, but, you know, putting a bit of pressure on and saying, we want to do this because our city wants to get out of this thing as quickly as we can. I'm just wondering whether this could see a resetting of the engagement and relationship and the balance between local support, regional support, and, you know, you and I have spoken in the past about devolution, how important it is. For me, if people like yourself, people like Andy Burnham would have had a little bit more power and responsibility at the outset of this, we may have seen a slightly different approach than what we've experienced.
Yeah, there's a lot in this question, Frank, very interesting to chew on it. The first thing to say is that I'm quite clear. I might have been elected as a Conservative, but on occasions you have to stand up and say the Conservative government hasn't got this right. And so I always said my first loyalty was to the people who elected me across the West Midlands, not to a political party. And actually, I think the last few weeks have sort of demonstrated that. That doesn't mean I don't support my party in any way, but it does mean you've got to remember where your loyalty is to. And it's one of the interesting things about doing this job rather than being an MP, because I am not whipped by any party at all. They all are. I'm only, I judge myself what I'm going to do. And on occasions, you get a message from Downing Street saying, what are you doing now, Andy? But, you know, there is an important principle there. The second thing is, the second important principle that you've drawn attention to is it is definitely right that some things would have been done better with greater local leadership. And the obvious example of this is the test, track and trace. And right back to the very first day this was launched, it was the 28th of May. It's been going nearly 6 months now, interestingly. I was asked to go on Newsnight that night and talk about it. And, you know, the situation was good on the 28th of May in terms of number of cases going down. And we talked about how the test, track and trace would drive out the residual cases. That's not proven to be the case. But I haven't changed the point. Fundamental point I made on Newsnight that night was you've got to trust local areas to do this. They know how it will best work in local areas. Needed a national infrastructure, of course, but the balance between national and local was not right in that test, track and trace. We would have got better results if we'd put more authority, more resource in each of our localities there. Not everything can be done in that way, of course not, but there are some really good examples of where the balance would better have been tilted. And then you come to the principle of devolution. I haven't changed my view at all. It's why I gave up my previous job to come and do this role, because I do believe that local leadership has a really important job in the future of Britain. And the economy of the West Midlands is different to the economy of the North East, is different to the economy of Cornwall. So it needs local leadership. But I'm not actually convinced that we've had some opportunities to make some really good political statements. You could even say some grandstanding. People will judge us for that. But I'm not sure that the government has really seized the opportunity to drive forward devolution yet. It remains sort of one of the big debates still to have in slightly calmer waters after the pandemic.
And I think we're looking forward as much as anyone to participating in that debate. As you know, we've been advocates of devolution for many years now. But listen, we could talk all day about the powers you haven't got, but I'd like to focus on the things that have been delivered during your tenure. And again, you've mentioned HS2, but one of the things that's really impressed me has been the money that you've been able to secure for local connectivity. Improvements as far as that's concerned. So how do you see that West Midlands, Birmingham transport connectivity developing as we move forward now? Oh. Sorry, Andy, I've lost you.
Sorry,
There you go.
I can hear you now, Frank. Yeah, go on, ask the question again.
Yeah, sorry, Andy, I was saying you've done great in terms of securing some monies for local transport connectivity as well. But it was a big issue, of course, in Birmingham, particularly the city, congestion, connectivity, getting in and around the city. What sort of things do you see happening from now on in as far as that particular?
Okay, well, thank you for asking this, because I think, arguably, this is the most direct deliverable for the mayor. If you think of what the mayor of London did when Ken Livingstone first became, everyone thought about the tube. So transport is the first and almost most poignant thing. And I actually think it's been a good few years for us. So again, pre-COVID numbers, but we had got many, many more people using all forms of public transport across the West Midlands. And that, of course, is really critical in terms of environmentalism, greening the economy. So if we just go through it, we had an increase in bus usage after 40 years of decline. And that was brought about, I'm absolutely clear, by two things. First of all, we've held fares flat for 3 years. No other city region in the country have done that. And that was through commercial negotiation with the private sector operator. So I'm really pleased with that. They've also poured millions, hundreds of millions of pounds into new rolling stock. So the new electric buses in Birmingham and Coventry are a brilliant example of that. And it's very clear, if you put brand new model buses onto the road, more people use them. So lower fares, better conditions, and also lots of work on the ground, and credit to our local authorities here to give bus prioritisation. So unlike other areas of the country, we had turned round the usage of buses, which was brilliant. Second thing is we've driven forward massively the usage of the metro. Again, really competitive fares and extending the network, of course, and running a very, very reliable service. But the biggest increase in patronage was on West Midlands trains. Now, that brought some difficulties, as we know, at the end of last year. But again, there was a mix of investment in rolling stock, increasing frequency of services was driving that. So all of our public transport was being used more, which was good for the environment. And we got some added little things, of course, like our scooter trial recently as well, which is also a form of transport. And the way we were also moving forward, we got vast capital sums, unprecedented sums of capital for extending the metro, building new railway stations. The sprint buses are coming. We've got the new cross-city buses as well. So the capital was also going in. And the good news is the big metro extension on Broad Street, we're very near to completing actually the last bit of welding of the track, and then we'll be moving to testing early next year, and the service coming in during the autumn of next year. So and we of course are just about to start the extension of East Side for the metro as well. So that money was secured in the budget. Diggers are about to go into the ground. So actually it's been a really quite positive story. All been knocked by the pandemic, but if you think of the future of any urban region, once we get back to being comfortable with some form of mixing, I am certain that public transport will come back steadily.
And infrastructure is going to be a big part of any recovery moving forward as far as the economy is concerned. So too, Andy, in terms of diversifying the economy, you mentioned earlier, opportunities, potential in this part of the world. And of course, innovation and health are going to be key components of that as well. And we know that there are a number of initiatives taking place at the moment, some great universities in this part of the world as well. So again, much cause for optimism in that space, yeah?
It's interesting you pull this out, Frank, because I wanted to, at some point, if you'd said to me, of all the things that have happened in the last 6 months, what gives you confidence in the West Midlands economy? It would have been the announcement that was Bruntwood were putting £210 million into what I call the Birmingham Life Sciences Park, but it now has to be called the Health Innovation Campus. So I'm old-fashioned there. But that is a vast sum of money, £210 million. And the decision came, I think it was October, wasn't it? In the teeth of the pandemic. And that was actually saying we have real confidence in the research that's going on in the university, the connection with the teaching hospital at QE, and then also, of course, all of the whole sort of engineering IT piece from the private sector to bring this innovation campus. And the other really good thing is it took just a little bit of money from the public sector, which we've been battling for about 8 years since I was LEP chair, actually, as the unlocker of this that finally came through the Get Building Fund. So it's a lovely story of different parts of the West Midlands coming together to create this. And this will mean jobs, high quality jobs in the future in an area in which I think we can lead. And when that was announced, I thought, however grim it is at the moment, there's a real beacon of hope there.
And you mentioned the, well, I call them science parks as well, but they've Have been rebranded now. But as I say, that's very much about future jobs and future opportunities. I've mentioned the universities there, but I'm also conscious of the fact that you've got a keen interest in skills, training and education.
Yeah.
You know, are you convinced that we've been able to shape our education space, if I can describe it that way, in a way where we're able to create these opportunities and those right? The way I put this really, Andy, I suppose, is that are we training our young people and perhaps even older people now for the jobs of the future, or are we still too pedestrian and traditional in what we're offering through those education, training and skills programs?
It's a really important question, this, Frank. And now the answer is some and some. I'll be entirely honest with you. We've made a lot of progress, but have we made enough? And do we need to go even faster? And have we now got an enormous challenge with people falling out of work on the back of the pandemic? Yes. So let me say why I think we've made some good progress, first of all. So if you look back over 10 years, have we got a much higher proportion of our population now qualified to a good level, level 3 we call it, in technical skills? Answer, yes. At level 3 overall, we're over 50% of the population now, and that's the first time we've achieved that in the West Midlands. We got that number just turn of last year. And that's been a lot of work from universities, from FE colleges, so we were definitely making really good progress. And I'm absolutely sure that that improvement in skills has actually coincided with our economic growth before the pandemic as well. And lots of organisations have stepped forward. From the CA, we've tried to make sure our adult education budget has been going on much more on skills for jobs rather than general life skills, you might call it. And we've also been making sure that some of the funds we've got, say our digital retraining, our construction training, has gone into really practical skills to get people into those growth industries. So there was generally a good picture. However, we now face a situation, obviously, of mounting unemployment daily. And have we got sufficient firepower to do what is the obvious consequence of that? So if you take something like digital retraining, we know that's going to be critical. We know where the growth is coming. We've got a fantastic record that people who go through those boot camps with us, it was called out by the Prime Minister as a national exemplar, then get into work. Yes, we've got that. Great example. But have we actually got enough of that going on? Answer, no. So bluntly put, and it's one of my current debates with London, we need to get more of the cash that's in this lifetime skills guarantee, the Prime Minister called it, didn't he, a few weeks ago. It was announced, but cash won't come through till April. And at the moment, the thought is it be centrally controlled. I want to see that coming to the front line in the West Midlands to do more of what has made us successful, given the new demand. Or if they can keep controlling the cash, I'm not too fussed, providing it actually does on the ground what the type of thing we've been talking about.
And then just moving on from that, Andy, in terms of, we've mentioned health, we've mentioned innovation, digital.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there are some still strong traditional sectors in this half of the world. And I know, again, you've been keen to speak up for them. I'm thinking, of course, about automotive, but I'm also thinking, again, we go back to connectivity. The one area we didn't mention was aviation, because we've got a fantastic airport in this part of the world as well.
Yep.
And that, I would suggest, is a sector that would say they perhaps haven't had the sort of attention and support that maybe they'd have expected.
They would say that. I was talking to the CEO of Birmingham Airport only on Monday afternoon, and was with the Secretary of State for Transport yesterday. And this is one of the subjects that I wanted to talk to him about. So they haven't had the support. And actually, I think the thing they would be most critical of was the whole approach to quarantine and testing. And again, this was another occasion where I did speak up. So when the quarantine was first brought in, it was in June. And, you know, I wrote to the Home Secretary, did CV things saying, I just don't think this is the right judgment. Or even if quarantine has got to happen, we must be able to do better than a 2-week blanket arrangement. I am optimistic, and I hope I'm not giving anything away here from my conversation yesterday, that possibly belatedly, we will move to a more sophisticated testing arrangement in our airports, and that will enable the airline industry to begin to resume a network of flights. Because bluntly put, most people, if they think they've got to isolate for 2 weeks, will probably not travel. I know they can't travel under the current lockdown, but as we come out of that, but if that period was much lower with more sophisticated testing, you probably will make a different judgment. So that's a very live issue, Frank, and that ultimately that will enable airports to heal themselves. I'm still long-term very optimistic for Birmingham Airport, though, because it's going to be brilliantly connected with HS2. I mean, literally 38 minutes to Euston, and that will mean it's closer to the City of London than Heathrow or Gatwick are. So actually, that might not be right when Crossrail is built in London, but it gives us a fantastic opportunity. So I'm a great believer in our airport long term.
Yeah, and forgive the pun, before the pandemic, the airport was absolutely flying. So there's no reason to believe it won't get back there. And then just that other, industry that we have a big association with in Birmingham and the West Midlands, of course, is car manufacturing.
Yeah.
You'll be closer to those guys than I am. Are they suggesting any fears about no deal Brexit, or are they sort of cracking on regardless?
Just reflecting on a panelist, an observation somebody's just made. I think it was Chris made a thing in the chat box about the HS2 station opening up new opportunities. That's exactly what I was trying to refer to, Chris. So thank you for drawing that to everyone's attention. So automotive, the answer to your question is both. Now, what do I mean by that? So, of course, they've got concerns over the Brexit trade deal. And I hope I've been utterly consistent about this for the last, ever since before I was elected to this job. I believe fervently we need a trade deal with Europe so that our manufacturers can continue to trade in the just-in-time way, tariff-free, that they do currently. And I still actually believe, and there'll be some on the call who says, oh, no, he's wrong, but ultimately the government will deliver that. And if you want a little bit of a political punt as well, the fact that Biden's been elected in the States, I think it makes it more likely that we will do the trade deal with Europe, because we will not be able to do the trade deal with the US in quite the same way as Donald Trump would have enabled for us. So they are obviously concerned about that. And there's a particular issue, it's like a technical issue that we're just going to be doing some media on in the next 2 days. Even if a deal is signed, there is this question of the rules of origin. So where do your components come from? Can they be considered to be British and therefore take part in the trade deal? So there's a little wrinkle there that we need to do some lobbying on. But having said all that, what I've got from the car manufacturers over the recent few months is we're lobbying hard, we know what we want, but ultimately we have got to deal with the situation as it presents itself. And actually where they are most focused of all is the technological changes that are coming across their industry, and why this whole question of electrification of their industry ultimately will trump anything political. And I am, in anything, a great believer that the social changes, the technological changes ultimately trump the politicians.
And Andy, it's always great to speak to you, because you're so open, transparent and honest about these issues. I'm trying to find an area where we can get some alignment between you and the government at the moment. So, let's move on to something where we may be able.
No. I mean, I told you the government will achieve a free trade deal. There will be alignment there, because you're being cheeky there, because that has been. I was no Brexiteer, but that has been Boris and Michael Gove and everyone else's intention to do the deal.
Yeah, okay. I was being cheeky, and you will allow me that, I'm sure. Once
I will. Yes. If I just came on here and gave you the government line, you'd be very disappointed, though.
I certainly would.
You can read that in the paper. Yeah.
The area where I would say there is absolute alignment is, I know that the government are as equally keen to make sure that the Commonwealth Games is a huge success, because we saw through the London Olympics, for example, how a big sporting event can attract not just great attention for the host city, but for the country as well. So as I say, I know that the government are keen that the Games is successful. Now, you briefly mentioned the athlete village and some of the challenges around that. But what I want to give today, Andy, is those positive messages about where we are with the games.
Yeah, of course.
And what we can look forward to.
And let's just, I can't help going back and picking the itch that discussing the itch that you mentioned about alignment, because there's another really important point to draw out. All of these big opportunities we're talking about, Commonwealth Games, City of Culture, HS2, 5G, the housing investment that's come into the region, literally £634 million we've got out of the government to underpin our housing investments. All of those are examples of where the government has backed our vision for the West Midlands. So there is utter alignment on those pieces. And it would have been very easy for the government to say, we are going to step back from any of these on the basis of the pressure on public sector finances on the back of the pandemic. So I think it's only fair to say they've absolutely backed us on all of those things. So the games, I guess there's three things I'd say quickly about that. All is on track for it to be a brilliant sporting festival, actually. The venues, obviously it's tough against COVID, but if you go and have a look at the aquatic centre in Sandwell, I don't know why we call it aquatic centre, swimming pool I'd call it. If you look at the swimming pool, you can see it's going to be a brilliant facility for citizens there in the future. Obviously the redevelopment of the Alexander Stadium, but all of the other places that are going to host sport, whether it be the university, whether it be the RICO, whether it be now Wolverhampton for the road race, brilliant. So it will be a sporting festival to be very proud of. The second thing, though, is it will honestly be a wonderful opportunity to promote Birmingham and the West Midlands around the world. And one of the things I'm excited about is, again, the budget just before lockdown. We got the funding for a critical piece of work that your audience will be interested in, called the TTI, Trade, Tourism and Investment. So when we bid for the games, it was all obviously about the sport, but it was also about this business promotion stuff. We've now got the budget to do it. We'll be kicking off that program early next year. And it's about selling business from this place around the world. And Neil Rami and the Growth Company lead that. And it's genuinely exciting. And then the third element is, of course, what citizens can do. So whether they be looking for new job opportunities, and there will be literally thousands of jobs for actually all of the staging of the Commonwealth Games, but also volunteering opportunities. And we've got in the Combined Authority the responsibility for what we call the Jobs and Skills Academy for the Games. And it's the early stages yet, but we'll see many more jobs and indeed volunteering opportunities being advertised through. And at a time coming out of the pandemic where jobs are so important, again, I think this is just a wonderful opportunity for us, actually, Frank. So sorry, long answer, but there's so much to celebrate in it, actually. And I'm still hugely excited that we won that opportunity.
I just think in terms of the international tourism, it's going to give us such a fabulous boost. And then if we return to that subject of earlier, those sectors that perhaps have been greatest challenge have the greatest opportunities there.
Correct.
I do want to, I meant to mention this earlier perhaps in the conversation, but given your background in retail, I'd just like to get your opinion on what the future of retail may look like, because you were responsible for transforming John Lewis, maintaining a fantastic brand there as its chief executive. But like all other brands, John Lewis are having their challenges at this moment in time. What about the wider retail sector, Andy? Any sort of opinion, advice, support that you think you would be able to offer them?
Well, I always try to be modest in this because that's my old world, but I don't mind giving a go. The first thing I would just say, and you might think this is a dodge of a question, it's not meant to be. It's meant to be just to make us think a bit more. The retail sector has got winners and losers at the moment, and three huge winners. The food retailers are actually having a corking time. Tesco's profits are enormous. They probably deserve them. I think the food retailers were heroes of the supply chain back in the spring, but it's not all retail's bad. There are some real success stories. So I think there is just a subtlety in what's happening there. Then, of course, there's a lovely story about shop local as well. Little little local high streets, particularly where they really serve the community, they've done well because people are not traveling into the big out-of-town retail destinations, let alone city centres. So, and that's maybe even a good thing socially, that people have gone back to their local butcher, baker, candlestick maker or whatever. And then the other thing that is, people see this as bad, but it's not. The online retail sector is obviously booming. And of course, there are jobs in that sector. They're not the traditional retail jobs that we all think about, but it's a huge success story for Britain. We're very good at this sector. And if you just think, for example, of all of the distribution and IT jobs that there are there, why is it there isn't a single commercial property vacant on industrial estates around the edge of the conurbation? It's because online retailers want them, either big or small. So there are some real big advantages of the shift in retail to these new places, and all the jobs, if you think web designers, e-marketeers, the people who are doing all the fulfillment logistics, none of that existed 10 years ago. So there's an upside to all of that, and we've got to go with that. However, where your question was really going is you're left then with the big high street brands who've got big shops in the retail centres. That is going to be really difficult. And so we have got to think, well, they've got to think about how they reinvent themselves. And we've got to think as public policy people about what the role of the city centre and the town centre is in the future. But, you know, that's happened many times in the past 200 years, and it will happen again. And I'm still a huge believer in the success of the city centre long term, but it won't look like it looks now, because we are still very social human beings. We've all missed that social interaction, Frank. That's what people talk most about on the back of the pandemic. And we will come into the city centre for new and different things in the future. So what we've got to do is be thinking about how we go with that change.
Andy, a final point from me before we turn to some questions from those looking in. There's a couple in the column I can see. One's particularly long, so I'll run through it for you. But we started off the conversation talking about post-pandemic Birmingham and West Midlands. I know that you've been working hard in terms of coming up with a recovery plan that we can potentially put to government and get support. I'd just like you to briefly run through what you think the key priorities of that plan are.
Yeah, so sorry, you did touch on this earlier and I didn't answer it properly. So what we did in July actually was cross-party with business as well. We put what we call our recharge asks to government, and that was all about the investment we wanted from them. So the critical elements of that is probably a really simple way of describing it. It was getting behind the sectors that were going to give us jobs of the future. So whether it was life sciences that we've talked about, the very first thing was the gigafactory, which we haven't mentioned that word yet, but we mentioned electrification. And then there was a whole piece as well about making the most of HS2, and particularly the cultural and creative sectors, particularly in the centre of Birmingham around Digbeth. So which are the new sectors we need to get behind, and where are the government investments that can then liberate private cash to really sort of grow? And the gigafactory was number one ask. Then the second type of thing is the sort of enabling. The economists on the call might call it the supply side of it. So what do we do to our transport, our housing, our IT, our digital connectivity to make sure the conditions for business were the very, very best? And also included in that is something we have not made the progress on that we're going to need to. What was the sort of financial, what were the finance markets doing? So we've had a huge amount of debt for business, but we haven't talked about equity, how businesses grow in that way. So it was the sectors and the enablers. And we were calling for government investment in all of those. But then we knew that local cash had to go in, and indeed private sector cash had to go in on the top of those. Now, it was always supposed to be long term, about 3 years we said over it. We've had some progress so far. If I'm honest, not as much as I might have liked, but probably what I expected. And the next big moment in this is obviously the comprehensive spending review, or now it's only 1 year at the end of this month. But that's what it was all about, Frank.
That's great. Thanks, Andy. Thanks very much for what was a fabulous brief description of what is a very ambitious.
£3.2 billion we were after. Yeah. Okay.
And fingers crossed. So just turning to our audience, a couple of questions that have been put into the chat room here. And this one is about furlough continues. Mass unemployment has been delayed a little like lockdown, as it's clear the government strategy is to wait for a vaccine. I'm just trying to get to the question here from Tom Bauer. Apologies, Tom. What support would you like to see once furlough stops to keep unemployment as low as possible and companies surviving whilst business starts to get back to normal? And I think it's a good point Tom's making, actually, isn't it? Because you will know, Andy, once cash flow starts to become a problem, it can be a little time before we get back to businesses that were very viable pre the pandemic, to getting back to where they were, or even near to where they were. Do you see the government perhaps providing some sort of halfway house?
Yeah, okay. So I'm not quite sure I think Tom's question is giving support for the extension of furlough, which I definitely think was the right thing. We were back to the situation where good businesses couldn't trade because of the lockdown, so we had to do that, and I don't think anyone is questioning that. At the end of the furlough period, there are three things I want to see. Some businesses will actually be able to accelerate away reasonably well if they're in a sector that can return. But as I said earlier on, there are some sectors that can't do that. And we talked about the live events industry, so we do need to move to some sectoral support and being specific about that. So I already called out that whole sort of exhibition, conferences, events sector, which I do not believe will be restored by that time. And we are going to need to intervene there because they are definitely viable businesses. The second thing, and this might be slightly controversial, but I do want to see more of government cash being concentrated in those areas that will be the new tech jobs of the future. I don't think there's been much done to actually support that thinking. So we talked a lot about in the previous governments have talked about increasing amount of expenditure on R&D, but have we actually seen that coming through? No, we haven't. So actually we are going to need to put public money, just in the way in which Germany and France do, into actually thinking about where are the real new innovations of the future and how are we going to get behind them. Okay. And then the third thing, and this is probably blindingly obvious, there will also be some sectors where some of the arrangements that have been put in to support them will need to be extended, but it's not about furlough. So it's about VAT rates, it's about business rates, holidays, it's about repayment of loans. And to your point about the cash, I'm particularly interested in this debt from loans. And I think there'll be SMEs who, if we're not careful, will be sunk by their debt. So I do want to see a negotiation of that debt or potentially turning it into equity. So I suppose what I'm trying to say in that is, if the timing is now looking right for the end of furlough, we're going to need to get to a, dare I say, a little bit more sophisticated, nuanced, targeted approach to get the right support for different businesses.
Great. Thanks, Andy. And a question from our lovely Louise from Common Purpose. She's saying, what do you think local leaders can do to support the city region, especially in relation to social inequalities, which seem to be widening?
Yes, right. This is a very important question, because there is no question that the effects of the pandemic are uneven, and particularly they are, what we know is they're very harsh on young communities. And we also know, no question about it, and be honest about it, that the effects are different for different BME communities as well. So what I would refer to, Louise, is tomorrow there is, Friday, there's a really important report coming to our board. And it's all about the regional health impacts of COVID. And it pulls absolutely no punches. It shows that the impacts have been much harsher on BME communities and on young people. And most importantly, it has 50 recommendations of what is going to be done. So it isn't just the diagnosis, it also says, and this is what we're going to lean into. And it's got some requests of government, but it's also got some requests for all of our partner organisations, so the health trusts, talks about police, all sorts, our local authorities. And so what I would say, Louise, rather than go through all those things now, the general answer is we acknowledge the point entirely, and we've tried to really lead into this in an honest way, not to try to dodge it. And frankly, there have been a number of reports written on this same subject that haven't led to action. We've got to make sure that in 6 months' time, I can't be accused of the same thing.
Thanks, Andy. Another one from Tom, actually. Have local government let down the hospitality sector? Other councils around the country seem to have granted temporary licences, easier pedestrianised streets, built significant outdoor space, parklets. He mentions Manchester, Liverpool, London, Newcastle. Can we learn from the mistakes of the first lockdown so that hospitality can thrive as we come out of lockdown 2? Again, Andy, you'll be well aware of these initiatives that have taken place across the country. Could we have reacted a bit quicker here in the West Midlands, do you think?
Probably. So I do think that some deserve credit. So the Commonwealth bid in central Birmingham certainly deserve credit for pushing hard on this. That was, and indeed the Southside bid have also done a really good job at these making these areas easy to use outside. So it's not all bad. The bids have really stepped in here, and that's probably a reflection of the fact we have very strong, well-established, very capable bids. So I think the answer is they've stepped in. You'll make your own judgment about whether a local authority should have done the same, and I probably am too diplomatic to comment on that, but the bids have done a good job. Yeah.
Thank you. I should also make the point, because we were involved in those initiatives in Manchester and Liverpool, they were both driven by the business improvement district.
Were they? I didn't know that. Okay, yeah, yeah.
So the council sort of came on board, but it was certainly led by the bids, and I think you're right, Andy, to point out the great job that the bids in Birmingham do. Yeah. So anyone else got a question, please put it in there. I'm just going to continue to chat because I've got one or two other things that I wanted to mention to you, Andy.
I thought we'd run out of your questions. Okay, fair enough.
I've never run out of questions for interesting people like you, sir. I just wanted to ask you on a personal level, because you've run big business, you're now running a big public sector organisation, and there's all sorts of conjecture at the moment about how people are going to come out of the pandemic, how we're going to react, whether cities are now dead as economic hubs and entities. And you very briefly mentioned before we're social animals. I'm just wondering if I could get your reflections on how you to this thing.
Yeah, sorry, just cut out a wee bit at the end there, Frank. Just say the last bit again.
How you think society is going to react to this pandemic?
Yeah. Okay, probably two things I'll draw on here. So the first thing to say is I am a great believer that cities will bounce back. I said earlier in the chat, possibly slightly glibly, that cities have adapted many times over, but it is true.
Sorry, Andy, we've lost you. I wonder whether...
I am very clear that there will be an equivalent purpose of that going forward. So, and of course for us, the whole exhibition conference stuff, the live music venues, the brilliant sporting venues in our town and city centres, those are the things that are going to come back. So I actually don't think we will suddenly see a sort of an abandonment of our cities. And of course, this whole idea of the office is dead. I also don't believe that. I do believe people will work at home many more days a week than they might have done at the moment. But most of the people who I know run big offices say, but we will have people in for some things, because it is still the most creative way, that is the most creative place to have people together and physically interacting. So I'm quite an optimist on that. The other one that I just wanted to draw attention to is this whole green recovery, because we've all talked, haven't we, about how we enjoyed the clean air in March and April, but we've all jumped back in our cars, or lots of people have jumped back in their cars. So there is something here to be slightly provocative, which goes, are we actually all going to change our personal behaviour in a way in which is supportive of what we say we want? And I'm, as I said earlier, a huge believer in public transport. I know why people aren't using it at the moment, but we do need to swing back there. And so there is going to need to be a bit of an introspective moment where people all say, how am I behaving, responding to this when things ease a little?
And Andy, we've had another question here, just reflecting on the answer you gave earlier about SME debt. And do you have any specific thoughts on how government can intervene to address this?
But you are right to pick up the fact I am hinting at. I do think we've got to think about what institutions, what funds we've got regionally that might be able to move debt to equity. It's easy to say, bloody hard to do, and we're not particularly good at this in the West Midlands, but we are definitely trying to think through what options we have around that. The Growth Company held a roundtable with lots of the experts on this only last Friday, and I am determined we make some progress on this because it's going to be a real issue for SMEs.
Okay. I think most of the other chat, I'm just flicking through now, seems to be comments.
Oh, yeah?
Positive comments.
I was going to say, I probably shouldn't read them, Frank. It's not good for me.
I think there's something around cycle lanes. Again, not really a question, I don't think. I think you've touched on all of that anyway. And final thing from me, Andy, I just, it's always so good to speak to you because you are certainly an optimist, a glass half full sort of guy. People in the north say to me, what sort of conservative is Andy Street? And I always say he's a West Midlands conservative because he puts the area before he puts any party politics. And I think you've certainly amplified that today. And as you rightly say, the resource that has been secured thus far during your tenure, the great infrastructure projects that we've got to look forward to in this part of the world, I think you can take great credit for. And listen, as I say, I've certainly enjoyed today's discussion.
Well, thank you.
I want to spring in my step in terms of the opportunity potential that we've got here.
And Frank, I love the fact that your friends in the north, if we're allowed to describe them like that, friends in the north are asking that question about what goes on here because, yeah, I mean, most of the people on the line will be from the West Midlands, and I genuinely think we've got an incredible opportunity here still, despite the enormous sideswipe. But the most important thing of all in it is teamwork and a belief, and the fact that the private sector also plays an absolutely critical role, as has come out in so many of the examples and conversations we've used, actually. And yeah, we've had billions of pounds of investment over the last few years in the West Midlands, but it's been leveraged many times over by what the private sector has done.
Great point, Andy. Thanks as ever for joining us. Thanks to our sponsor today, Barrows and Forrester.
Of course.
Thanks for everybody joining us. And Andy, I hope to see you face to face early in the new year.
Well, so I'll be there if we are at all allowed, Frank. Okay. Cheers. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, Andy. Thank you. Bye.